My name is Nora Hale. I'm 62, a widow, and I work part-time checking books in and out at the public library. I rent a basement beneath a young family's house, low ceiling, thin heat, a secondhand kettle that has outlived better furniture. Most nights I read a few pages before sleep and listen to the pipes breathe. On Christmas night, a fundraising gala lit a ballroom like noon. My son Adrian Hale tailored suit, easy grin, lifted a glass and said to a room full of donors, "I just bought my mother a $2 million home." Applause burst like confetti. Phones rose. I stood near a doorway in a thrift store dress, steadying my hands in each other. I did not clap. I did not object. I let the wave roll over. The truth was plainer on the first of every month. I slide $700 to my landlord for the basement. The carpet never dries in winter. My coat lives on the back of a chair because there is no closet. But Adrian's sentence fit the room. It served a purpose appearance. His wife Sloane smiled the kind of polite smile that expects agreement. When the music thinned, I walked past the valet stand 3 blocks to my old car and drove home through cold streets. I let myself in by the side door, careful on the stairs. In my small room, I turned on the lamp with the yellow shade, set the kettle on the burner, and waited for the soft whistle. The upstairs family settled a cupboard, a laugh, a child running from one room to the other. Steam rose. I wrapped both hands around the cup, and memory walked in uninvited. David, my husband, gone 12 years, and the long arithmetic of making ends meet. Extra shifts, quiet meals, tuition paid late, but paid. In early January, Adrian invited me to lunch at a glass-walled restaurant where the waiter seemed to glide. He spoke in smooth, certain paragraphs. There was a trust, there were structures and vehicles, plans for long-term security. You don't have to understand all the details, he said. What matters is you're safe and people see that I take care of you. Sloane arrived in a soft coat and told me to enjoy. I folded my napkin into a thin triangle and let the conversation pass like weather. When the bill came, Adrian paid with a magician's speed, as if proof lay in the flourish. Outside, the sun bounced from bright windows. I took the bus carrying no shopping bag, only the weight of a sentence that did not match my rent. That afternoon at the corner market, someone spoke my name. Walter Brooks, an old friend of David's, stood by the soup aisle with surprise in his eyes. He had seen the gala photos. "So, how's the new place?" he asked warmly. The can slipped in my hand and thudded against the shelf. "I rent a basement," I said. $700 a month. His smile loosened. He did not argue or soothe. He simply nodded, and in that small nod I saw how far a story can travel without a passport. Back home, I put away groceries, set the kettle on again, and pulled open the desk drawer. A cheap spiral notebook waited unused, patient. On the first page, I wrote slowly enough to keep my hand from shaking. Birch Lane basement rent $700. The ink feathered a little. I flattened old rent slips, stacked utility bills, and tucked them beneath a paperclip. Not to fight. To keep record. I did not call Adrian. I did not send Sloane a message. I chose a different kind of sound, the scratch of a pen, the click of a kettle. If there was a house, it would appear on paper. If there was only an announcement, paper would say that too. My quiet would stop meaning consent and start meaning preparation. That night, I placed the notebook beside the lamp and left the pen uncapped. The room was still small, but it felt less like a corner and more like a desk. The kettle cooled. I slept with the easy knowledge that the first line of the truth had finally found a home. The first week after I opened the notebook, my life arranged itself around small acts that made no sound. I emptied the shoebox beneath the bed and ironed every curled receipt under the warm plate of my library card laminator, one by one, never scorching, just pressing the paper flat enough to be legible. I dated the margins with a thin black pen, Jan Rent PD, Elec PD, Gas PD. When the upstairs children thundered down the hallway, I paused. Let their footsteps pass and returned to the arithmetic of a life no one applauded. At the library, it was return season. People brought back stacks of holiday novels with snow-dusted covers and improbably happy endings. I slid each book across the scanner and taped a torn dust jacket while the public computers hummed. On my break, I took the far table by the window, opened my spiral and copied numbers, check numbers. Confirmation codes, landlord's surname, the last 4 digits of each utility account. It wasn't anger that steadied my hand. Anger flares and smokes out. This was something else, metal cooling to hardness page by page. Walter began stopping by, near closing with a paper bag of fruit he claimed he'd overbought. "Bananas don't keep," he'd say, laying them beside the return bin. We talked the way old porch boards talk, without hurry, with a memory of weather. He did not ask about mansions again. He asked what I needed. I told him stamps, folders, a hole punch. The next evening, he brought a small binder, blue with plastic sleeves. "For the important ones," he said, "so they don't wander." I slid the rent slips into the first sleeve and felt a satisfaction too plain to name. Adrian called on a Tuesday night when the boiler coughed the air into a damp warmth. I let it ring twice, not to punish, only to choose. And then I answered. His voice had the varnish that made donors lean forward. Mom, I've been thinking. There's chatter, you know how people get after a gala. I want you to hear this from me. Everything is in motion. We're consolidating assets into a trust-audited proactive, exactly the framework we discussed. We didn't discuss, I said and wrote the time in the notebook. You presented. A small laugh. Words, Mom. The point is, your security is non-negotiable. The optics are already paying dividends. People admire a man who takes care of his mother. That admiration translates into opportunities. Opportunities, I wrote. Then, because paper's hungry for the exact word, I added optics. You don't need to see the mechanics, he went on. It's like the engine under the hood. What matters is the ride. David always opened the hood, I said. Engines lie less than speedometers. I could hear him exhale, a little impatient. You're overthinking. Let me carry this. Enjoy the gift. He wanted me to bless the story as if my silence were a ribbon. I told him I had to set the kettle on and hung up gently, then wrote his phrases in a column. Trust Consolidated Optics Gift, and drew a square around gift. Gifts you can hold. Words you can only quote. That weekend, Walter drove me to the community center for their senior clinic. The building was a former elementary school with tiled hallways still marked by small shoe scuffs. In room 12, a half-dozen volunteers sat behind cafeteria tables, each with a sign. Housing, taxes, Medicare. At the far end, a woman with dark hair threaded through a low bun in a navy sweater that did not advertise itself looked up and met my eyes without decoration. Her sign read Legal Aid. Ms. Hale, she said after Walter introduced us. I'm Patricia Lang. Why don't we sit? She listened. That is the first work of an honest lawyer. No theatrics, no sharpening of words to prove they know better. She let the facts fall in the order I carried them: the gala, the sentence about a $2 million home, the basement, the $700, the lunch with structures and vehicles, the call about optics, the binder. When I finished, she didn't leap to outrage or comfort. She asked me to slide the binder closer. She turned each sleeve with deliberate fingers the way I turn pages at the circulation desk. Your documentation is excellent, she said. Consistency wins more arguments than volume. I'm not arguing, I said. Neither am I, she answered. I'm preparing. She took a legal pad and drew a square with 3 letters at the corners: RUB, rent, utilities, bank. These triangulate your reality. Now tell me this has your son claimed in print that he supports you. Press releases, interviews, grant proposals. I don't read his press, I said, but the room read his sentence. The room is his press. It often is, she said. Here's what I recommend: continue the record. Keep a contact log of every conversation, date, time, verbatim phrases as best you can. If he references a trust, ask where it is written and who the trustee is. Don't accuse, don't warn, don't tip him toward shredders. If there is a financial instrument, it will leave tracks. If there is only the theater, the stage lights burn their own paper trail. And if it's just theater, I asked? Then we'll move from preparation to preservation letters, to his company, to banks, to donors whose funds might have been solicited with your name. They will be told not to destroy records, quietly, formally. You're not powerless, Ms. Hale. You're methodical. She gave me 3 manila envelopes and a checklist with boxes so small they forced neatness. On the way out, Walter squeezed my shoulder and said, engines run on oil, cases run on dates. I tucked the envelopes under my arm like hymnals. Days stacked. I bought a cheap phone with a recording app, not to trap my son, just to cage my memory. When Adrian called again to tell me about a symbolic gesture, the firm was planning a photo op where I would receive a ceremonial key. I asked a single question, the kind a librarian asks. What shelf can I find the trust on? I'd like the title, the file number, and the trustee's contact. He paused, surprised by the vocabulary of shelves. Mom, you don't need. I'll make a note, I said, and the line clicked quiet with an old kind of anger that had nothing to do with me. After we hung up, I wrote, key ceremony proposed. No title produced. Silence heavy. At the library, a mother asked if we had any books that teach children to tell the truth. I guided her to the 107s and thought about how we used to teach everything with stories, and now we sell stories to hide everything. On my dinner break, I walked the aisles of the corner market and bought a roll of brown paper and string. Back home, I wrapped the binder as if it were a gift to my future self and labeled the package with the neat block letters I learned in 9th grade home life Q1. Sloan appeared first in an unexpected place, the library's lobby, wearing a cream coat that turned every surface into background. Nora, she said brightly, the way people say bright words to dim a room. I thought I'd find you. We're hosting a small dinner Friday. Not a gala, just close friends. Come. It will be helpful. Helpful to whom, I asked. To all of us, she said, and smiled the practiced smile that asked you to be reasonable by forgetting your own reason. I told her I would consider it. When she left, I wrote helpful and underlined it twice because sometimes the most dangerous words are the ones that sound like medicine. On Friday, I wore the navy dress I use when the occasion demands I look like I'm trying. The apartment of Adrian's associate had tall bookshelves and wine poured into glasses that made water ashamed. The table was long, the napkins folded into precise boats that would never float. I chose a seat near the end and watched my son move through the room as if the floor consented with each step. Sloane hovered half a second behind his gestures, the choreography perfect. Halfway through the main course, a man across from me, Ty, wide watch wider, leaned forward. Your son is a wonder, Mrs. Hale, he said. Buying his mother that home, my own mother would faint. Where is it, by the way, Highland Park, Preston Hollow? His voice carried just enough for talk to hush. You could feel the room lean toward the answer, the way heads tilt toward a fireworks crack that isn't supposed to be thunder. I thought of Patricia's boxes of the triangles she drew. I thought of Walter in the soup aisle with his loosened smile. I set my water down to one side, squared the base with the napkin's edge, and found the cleanest sentence in the drawer. Basement, I said, Birch Lane, $700 a month. The sentence did no work to convince. It did not raise its voice or swing its arms. It simply stood. For a long fingertip of time, no one coughed or reached or filled the pause with noise. Sloane's smile hardened like a glaze left too long in the oven. Adrian laughed sharp the way you laugh when a vase tips and you pretend it's only a breeze. Mom likes to tease, he said to the table. She's terrible with compliments. No one chuckled. People looked at their plates as if truth had touched the silverware. I took a bite of something delicate that no longer had a taste and chewed the way you chew through dentist cotton. The man with the watch stared down and then up as if searching for a script he had dropped. Oh, he said finally. Oh. After dinner, I thanked the host, took my coat, and stepped into a night that had the polite cold of a well-bred dog. At the bus stop, I held the binder-shaped package inside my tote and felt the corners through the canvas. On the ride home, two teenagers argued in the back about a basketball foul that would be debated into college. I listened and thought of fairness and whistles and how a single sound can stop a room full of men. The next morning, the whispers began to flap like laundry hung too soon. You can hear a rumor by its errand boy energy. It runs, it trips, it brings pieces in the wrong order. At the library, a woman checking out travel guides said, I read about that lovely gift your son gave you. 2 hours later, another at the magazine carousel said, We used to live near Birch Lane. Funny, I swear, I saw you with groceries last week. I taped a spine and did not edit their sentences. Paper doesn't argue with gossip. It waits it out and then wins. Adrian called at noon, no varnish. What are you doing? He said, anger thinning his voice into wire. Shelving biographies, I said. Duke Ellington under E, but many people look for him under D. You humiliated me, he said. Investors asked questions I shouldn't have to answer. Perception matters, Mom. You can't just contradict me in front of clients. You contradicted yourself, I said. I provided a footnote. Do you want me to fail? He asked, and the question was the truest thing he'd said all month. Not a query, but a lever. I wrote it in the notebook. Do you want me to fail? Do. I want to stop renting dignity from your stories, I said. I'd like to own it. He went quiet long enough for the line to grow a low hum. You don't understand how it works, he said at last. I understand how rent works, I answered. On the first of the month, reality withdraws itself from your account. I hung up before his next sentence. Not to win, to finish. That evening, Walter brought over an apple pie his sister insisted was healing for all known wounds. We ate plates of it with forks too big for the crust, and talked about the weather because sometimes weather is kinder than other topics. When he left, he placed his hand on the binder-shaped package and said, Keep building. The kettle agreed in its small metal language. On Sunday, Patricia called from a number the phone did not recognize. I spoke with a colleague in media law, she said. No names, only hypotheticals. If a public statement materially misrepresents a relationship to solicit funds or favor, there are remedies. I don't want punishment, I said. I want the truth to stop renting space under chandeliers. Then aim for correction, she said. Not revenge. Correction can be quieter and more permanent. May I draft some letters, not to send yet, to have ready? Preservation notices in case a story turns into paper. Draft, I said, and she laughed softly at the single word. I like how you authorize, she said, as if stamping a due date. Some things deserve due dates, I said. Some are already overdue. On Monday, the associate who had hosted the dinner sent a note through Sloane Lovely to see you. In the corner, written faintly in a hand that had learned caution, was a question. Was I misinformed? I did not answer. I put the note in Q1 beneath the sleeves of rent and utilities. Evidence is not only numbers. Sometimes it is the handwriting of a man noticing his own gullibility. The upstairs children in my building began knocking softly on my door to ask for tape or string. Their mother apologized, but I told her I was a librarian. Tape and string are our finest technologies. One evening, the little girl, hair in 2 braids, peeked at my open notebook. "Are you doing homework?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "for a class where everyone gets older but not everyone gets smarter." She nodded solemnly, as children do when they catch an adult's sentence and put it in their pocket like a marble. When they left, I wrote, "The upstairs girl recognizes homework, so do I." A week later, the binder outgrew its sleeves. I bought another green this time and labeled it Q2 Prep because optimism too can be methodical. Patricia met me at the community center with a folder of drafts. They were plain letters free of thunder. "Dear Sir or Madam, this is to request preservation of any and all documents, communications, or media containing the representation that Mr. Adrian Hale purchased a residence for Ms. Nora Hale." Seeing my name and his on the same page, not as mother and son, but as nouns in a sentence a court might read, made my fingers go cold. Patricia saw the blanch and said, "You're not pushing the button, you're building the panel." On a Thursday, the library hosted a small after-hours event for donors who still believed in libraries. There were no chandeliers, only paper lanterns that made every face tender. I poured coffee into compostable cups and thanked a woman who had funded our children's corner rugs. The director, a practical man with the haircut of a coach, stood to make remarks. He spoke about circulation numbers and third spaces and the way a good library is a kind of weather system for a town. When he finished, he gestured toward me. "Nora keeps the place in orbit," he said. "If your child has a card, she probably slid it across the desk with that quiet nod of hers." People clapped in the way library people clap, enthusiastic but aware of neighboring sentences. I felt myself blush and then steady. This applause did not cost me anything I had to rent back. On the walk home, I passed a shop window and caught my reflection between mannequins. I looked like a woman who would not knock on a door she had not been invited to, and also like a woman who would check the hinges twice once inside. I thought of the question that would be asked again. "Do you want him to fail?" and answered it aloud to the glass. "No. I want him to learn the difference between face and self." The mannequin in the window had better posture than I did, but less conviction. The next invitation wore charity colors. Sloane called, voice glossed with the promise of goodwill. "A fundraiser next Thursday," she said. "Local press, nothing splashy. It would be meaningful if you came. People like the full circle of a story." "Circles have centers," I said. "Sometimes the center is a basement." She hesitated. "Please, Nora, for Adrian." "I'll come," I said, "because sometimes you go to the place where the lie breathes to watch your breath fog the glass." In the days before the event, I sharpened pencils to points a surgeon would admire. I wrote questions on index cards in the same hand I used when I taught Adrian to spell who is the trustee, where is the deed, what account paid the taxes. I did not plan to ask them aloud. I wanted the answers to exist somewhere besides his mouth. The hall was smaller than the gala, warmer, with string lights that tried to make everyone look like a story you'd like to keep. Adrian shook hands. Sloane floated, and I found a seat near a pillar where I could feel the building hold. During the lull between salad and something roasted a man in a checked jacket. The sort who remembers your name to lend himself credibility raised his glass toward me. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "your son's gift inspired my own mother to forgive my college loans." Laughter gentle. "Where is your new place again? I'd love to send flowers." I lined my glass with the napkin as if building a compass and heard Patricia's voice like a level in my pocket. "Truth doesn't clear its throat. It answers the question asked." "Basement," I said. "Birch Lane, 700 due on the 1st. The lights didn't dim. The room did. Not theatrically, more like a cloud slid across a sun that had been performing brightness. The checked jacket nodded once as if his neck had become a hinge. On Adrian's face, I watched a boy I once knew calculate how to confess a broken window to a father who preferred the car fixed and the story neat. He chose neither. He said nothing. The silence did the arithmetic for him. Okay. When the evening ended, I thanked the woman with the donation envelope and stepped into the night. On the bus, the driver, a woman with a braid as thick as a rope, hummed a hymn I remembered from a church we used to visit on potluck Sundays. I hummed along under my breath and thought of circles again, how some widen until they include you, and some tighten until they reveal what's choking at the center. Back home, I set the kettle on and opened Q2 Prep. I wrote on a fresh page, charity dinner question about residents, answer given. Witnesses 20-30 enough. I added the time, the address, the name of the catering company because paper respects facts the way engines respect oil. I slept with the window cracked an inch despite the cold. Somewhere a siren ran a red light and a dog negotiated with it. The boiler hiccuped, the kettle cooled. My notebook lay open on the chairpan across the spine like a bar that could lift with one finger. Tomorrow would require nothing dramatic. Only more dates, more receipts, more sentences that fit without adjectives. The story that had been borrowed from my name was starting to feel its due date approach. Before I turned off the lamp, I wrote one last line. Not a threat, not even a hope, just an axiom I wanted to see in my own hand. Paper arrives late, but it arrives. Then I clicked the light, and the room, small as ever, held me without shrinking. By Monday, the room had learned a new hush. It wasn't the kindly quiet of books or the late hour. It was the pause people keep when a story trips on its own hymn. At the library desk, I stamped dates and slid cards while my phone face down on the shelf vibrated twice, 3 times, then stopped as if even it were trying not to be overheard. At noon, I stepped into the staff hallway where the breaker box hums and answered. Adrian did not varnish his voice. "What are you doing, Mom?" "Replacing a toner cartridge," I said, and uncapped my pen over the notebook. "This isn't cute. You contradicted me twice in rooms I have to work in. Investors are spooked. You're creating doubt where there should be confidence." I wrote spooked doubt confidence. I described my address, I said. "The doubt belongs to the sentence you preferred." He exhaled a sound like impatience pressed through a comb. "Stop telling people you live on Birch Lane. Stop telling them the rent. If someone asks, pivot. We keep our family matters private. Say that. You're hurting yourself." "You're worried about face," I said. "I'm worried about self." "For God's sake," he snapped. "Do you want me to fail?" I copied the question onto clean paper the way a teacher makes a student copy a spelling word. "No," I said. "I want you to tell the truth without renting my name." He tried a softer register. "Look, this is bigger than you. The way narratives work. Engines work," I said. "Narratives sell." "You'll regret this," he said, and hung up before I could set the period where it belonged. I stood a moment in the fluorescent hallway, listening to the electricity hold steady in the wires, and wrote the time. When I returned to the desk, a child asked for tape. I handed it over. "Take 2 pieces," I said, and she did with the solemnity of a pact. They came on a Sunday afternoon without phoning first Adrian in a blazer that believed in him, Sloane in a cream coat and heels that resented my steps. The knock rattled the thin door. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and opened it. "Nora, we need to talk," Sloane said already inside. Her perfume sat heavily on the room, arguing with the mild mildew the way 2 sopranos duel. I gestured to the table and set the kettle on, because a librarian serves tea even when the book isn't kind. Adrian looked around as if the room itself would apologize for existing, narrow bed-chipped dresser lamp with the yellow shade the wrapped binder on the chair. "This has gone far enough," he said, pulling a folded document from his leather folio. "We drafted a simple statement for you to sign clarifying that certain remarks were misinterpreted, that you prefer privacy, that the matter is settled. It will calm things down." Sloane slid the paper across the table and set a pen upon it, the way a maitre d' sets a bill practiced polite expecting only one outcome. "What does it say?" I asked, though. I had already read the shape of it in their faces. "That you appreciate my support, that the home is a long-term family asset," Adrian said. "No numbers, just harmony." I poured tea into 3 chipped cups without spilling. "I pay $700, I said, "on the 1st of the month, for this basement." Sloane kept the smile around her teeth. Her fingers tightened on the pen. "No one is asking you to say otherwise," she lied gently. "We're asking you not to complicate things." Complicate, I wrote on the page, define. She blinked not at the word, but at its presence on a line I could carry out of the room. "You don't have to weaponize every conversation, Nora," she said. "We're trying to help you." "Help looks like a receipt," I said. "Or a key, or a deed. Words don't hold heat in winter." Adrian's jaw worked. He tapped the statement. "If you won't sign this, at least stop making a scene. You don't understand how business—" "I understand the ink on my rent slips," I said, and pressed the pen harder so the page took a small groove. "I understand that a lie is not harmless when it wears my name." The kettle clicked low behind me. No one reached for their cup. Sloane rose first chair, scraping the floor, then smoothed her coat with palms that still trembled. "You're being uncooperative," she said, this time without sugar. "There will be consequences." "There always are," I said. "That's why we keep records." Adrian stood slower, watching me as if there were still a lever to pull a word that would fold me back into a convenient shape. When he realized there wasn't, he followed her to the door. "We'll talk later," he said, but it sounded like someone practicing future tense in a language that would no longer have him. When the latch closed, the room exhaled. It did not make me bigger. It made me tired. I sat at the table and let the tears come the way a kettle lets steam steadily without fanfare. I did not wipe them in a hurry. I had waited long enough for permission. When the water cooled, I stood, opened the drawer, and lifted the wrap binder. Beneath it lay the green one Q2 prep and my spiral with the patient. First page now fat with dates and phrases. I placed them side by side and said aloud to the metal body I'd carried through 3 apartments and a marriage. Silence did its job. Now the paper goes to work. On Monday, I called Patricia from the library's break room. where the vending machine collects coins like a miser. I'm ready, I said, not to shout, to bring you everything. Her voice did not rise in triumph. Come this afternoon, she said. Bring the notebooks and the receipts. We'll begin preservation. Her office was on the second floor of an old brick building that used to be a bank, the kind of place where Wood remembers signatures. The stairwell smelled faintly of polish and the humbler dust of small victories. Patricia met me at the door and guided me to a long table crowded with code books and legal pads. She untied the string on my package and spread the contents with a librarian's grace. These, she said, tapping the rent slips, are continuous. That matters. These, the utilities, show direct responsibility. The bank statements confirm no deposits from any trust. And this, she lifted my spiral as if it were a witness with a quiet voice, is contemporaneous notes. Judges like that word. I didn't write for a judge, I said. I wrote because memory blurs when it gets tired. Both truths can serve, she said, and slid a stack of typed letters toward me. These are preservation notices. They instruct relevant parties, not that we have named them aloud, to maintain all records related to your son's statements and any financial instruments. Once logged, failure to preserve becomes a sin with teeth. She placed the first letter in front of me, my name in the header, my address on Birch Lane, like an unashamed fact. Sign where indicated, she said. You are not accusing anyone of a crime. You are asserting your existence. My hand shook a little, not with fear, with the unfamiliar weight of writing something that would move beyond my table. I pressed the pen down. The ink made a confident line even if I did not. I signed the second notice, then the third. Each signature felt like placing a brick unshowy necessary part of a wall that stayed put when a breeze tried to call itself weather. We'll file these with the clerk this afternoon, Patricia said, clipping the stack with a black binder clip that could survive a storm. Then we deliver them, quietly. We walked together to the courthouse. It was colder inside than out, as public buildings often are saved for the heat of decisions. The clerk's window sat behind glass, not unfriendly, simply firm. Patricia spoke with the even tone of a person who refuses to hurry truth. The clerk stamped each letter with a heavy, satisfying thud, the sound of ink meeting paper and becoming record. When she slid the ledger toward me, I wrote Nora Hale in the best hand I owned. For once, my name did work. Outside on the steps, Patricia touched my arm. What comes next will not be cinematic, she said. It will be incremental. But increments are what topple stone. I don't want a toppling, I said. I want a correction. Good, she said. Corrections keep more than they break. We stood a moment watching a stroller bounce down the last stair and a man carry a briefcase as if its latch were a promise. Then she gave me copies for my files and told me to go home and eat something warm. Walter was waiting at my building with a bag of groceries he pretended he couldn't carry alone. He listened while I told him about stamps and ledgers. Clerks are the unsung, he said. They move the stories into boxes other people can't pretend not to see. We shelved the canned soup, boiled noodles, and sat at my small table with a bowl each. He asked no questions about how Adrian would answer. He asked whether I had enough folders. I did for now. That night, I wrote on a fresh page filed preservation notices. Clerk Miss Duarte, nameplate. Time 3:14 p.m. Patience required. Kettle whistled upon return. Then I placed the pen across the spiral spine the way a latch holds a door shut without locking it. Adrian did not call that evening. Sloan texted at 10:06. You've made this ugly. I hope you're proud. I put the message into Q2 Prep printed at the library in a font that would not blur and wrote a small note at the bottom. Pride is not the point. Dignity is. In the days that followed, Patricia sent certified copies where they belonged. I wore the receipts like a private necklace made of numbers and names. The upstairs children learned to knock before borrowing string. The boiler stuttered and then found its rhythm. I sharpened pencils. I checked spines. I made tea. On Thursday, the library director asked whether I could stay late for a community reading. I said yes. I like rooms where people sit for words that do not sell anything. A teenager with a nose ring read a poem about her grandmother's hands. An old gentleman recited a sonnet he'd known 50 years. When it was my turn to return the microphone to its clip, I felt something settle. This, too, is record voices logged in ordinary air. Walking home, I thought of my son as a boy with rocks in his pockets he named Treasure. I did not mistake him for the man who had learned to say optics like a sacrament. Love does not require blindness. It requires the will to look and still tell the truth. At the sink, I rinsed 2 cups and set them upside down to dry. The kettle clicked as it cooled a small metal heartbeat. I opened the spiral and wrote one line I wanted to be able to read without flinching. Years from now, I didn't shout. I signed. Then, I turned off the lamp. The room exact as ever held me at my size. The first headline arrived like a polite knock I had already heard in my bones. Someone left the morning ledger on the library table folded to a story, 2 columns wide. Local executive questioned over claim of buying mother a $2 million home. My name appeared in the second paragraph, plain as print, not a rumor's whisper. The piece quoted documents reviewed and requests to preserve records. It did not quote me, it didn't have to, paper had learned to speak. Patricia called before lunch. We didn't feed that story, she said, but reporters read the clerk's log like scripture. Expect echoes. I'm not giving interviews, I said, and slid a biography across the scanner. I'm shelving. Good, she replied. Let the record do the talking. If anyone calls, route them to me. Adrian did not call. Sloan sent one message. You've ruined everything, and then the kind of silence that is really a calculation. In the afternoons, whispers moved through rooms I wasn't in. Did you hear? But at the gala, he said, Birch Lane. The sound bothered me less than it used to. A whisper can bruise you when you carry it alone. It becomes weather when you are holding receipts. Walter showed up with the brochure he tried to look casual about. Senior apartments subsidized 2 bus lines from here, windows that remember how to be windows. He rested the pamphlet on the return counter next to a stack of mystery novels. I brought it home and read every line with a pencil circling requirements like a student doing extra credit. Patricia looked over my application, tapped the attachments and nodded. Rent receipts, utility bills, proof of income, your life is already a file. Weeks thinned themselves with ordinary workdate stamps, lost card forms, a child confiding that she'd read her first book without pictures. At night, I added lines to Q2 prep without flourish, reporter called, referred to counsel. Library closed early for storm. Boiler steady. On a Thursday in late winter, an envelope arrived with the city seal. I slid it carefully with a butter knife and read the word approved as if it were a soft bell rung in the next room. The place was small and bright, a second-floor unit where sunlight arrived without asking permission. The window faced east. The kitchen counter had no chip to hide beneath a coaster. On moving day, Walter carried boxes that didn't deserve the name books, a kettle swaddled in towels, the 2 binders, the spiral notebook far too heavy for its weight. We set the kettle on a clean stove. Its enamel chipped along one flank from a decade-old drop caught the light and made something like dignity of the flaw. We stood there a moment foolishly proud of an ordinary sink. You did this, Walter said. Paper did, I answered, and turned the burner until blue appeared. When the kettle sang in a room without mildew, I cried in the loose, grateful way that doesn't try to tidy anything. We drank the first cups like a kind of housewarming oath. Patricia and I kept moving pieces unshowy. Preservation notices had sprouted responses. One bank produced nothing under the trust name Adrian had implied. Another acknowledged an inquiry and promised to hold communications. An event planner forwarded emails where optics did most of the verbs. The district attorney's office requested copies, not drama. Incremental, Patricia reminded me. Corrections are built, not announced. I saw Adrian once from a distance, crossing the marble lobby of a building that liked to be looked at. He wore a suit the color of the sky that threatens rain. A man matched his stride and lowered his voice. I did not go near. Love isn't a passcode to every room a son enters. Sometimes it's a boundary you keep for both of you. The second article came kinder and colder, philanthropy and perception when image oversteps. It quoted people who knew the word ethics without making it feel like a stage. No charges, no verdicts, just the curtain pulled back far enough for donors to see the pulleys. I clipped it and slid it behind the rent sleeves, not to savor, only to complete. In the new apartment, life made a different sound. Upstairs was sky. The window became a habit. I sat beside it with the notebook and wrote in a hand that had stopped shaking. Moved. Window faces east, rent affordable, dignity intact. Children in the courtyard invented rules for a ball game and obeyed them with happy seriousness. I slept without my coat across my legs. Some mornings light woke me before the clock, and the first object it touched was the kettle. Occasionally a question still tested a room. At a small fundraiser for the library's teen programs, a man with a check jacket, another one or the same, lifted his glass toward me. Mrs. Hale, where should we send a plant for the new house? I didn't let the room grow hungry for fiction. Apartment, I said. 2 bus lines from the library. East window. I pay my own rent. The quiet that followed was not shock this time. It was respect finding its seat. One evening alone by the window, I took out the letter I had written months ago and never sent the one to a boy with rocks in his pockets who promised to buy me a castle. The envelope had softened at the edges from being moved too often. I slid it back where it lived. Some words are not for the mail. They are for the person who survived writing them. I did not invent forgiveness. I let it come on its own feet, not as absolution, not as performance, but as a boundary I could keep even on the days when memory tried to bargain. If Adrian called, I would answer. I would keep a log. I would say what was true and nothing dressed. I would meet him in rooms where paper could join us. Spring arrived the way truth does later than anyone wanted exactly when it could. The library put a planter of marigolds by the entrance. The teenagers argued less about who owed fines and more about which poem to put in the yearbook. I learned the names of my new neighbors and the right hour to catch the bus without a crowd. On a Tuesday that smelled faintly of rain and soap, I wrote the last sentence I had promised myself I didn't shout. I signed. I moved toward a light. I closed the spiral and let my hand rest on the cover the way you rest a palm on a sleeping dog, fond, grateful, careful not to wake the old hurt. The kettle began to whisper. I crossed the small kitchen, lifted it before it screamed and poured. Steam rose visible and ordinary. If anyone were to ask me what I learned, I would say this. If a mask is fastened to your name, you do not have to wear it. Paper and patience can outlast chandeliers. A basement is not a destiny. Light finds its way to the page. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.